معرفة.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In this lesson, let us discuss about syndicate finance. The purpose of syndicate finance is that a group of investors come together to provide financing to the corporate, because the funding requirement of the corporate is huge. In Islamic finance, the two main structures which are used to provide financing are the ijara and the murabaha. And we will discuss both about the ijara and the murabaha. Let us start our discussion with the ijara syndication. In this ijara syndication, this is the corporate, and this corporate has certain funding requirements or some liquidity requirements or some cash requirements. But this requirement is huge. Therefore, a group of financial institutions come together to provide this funding requirement of the corporate. Generally, what happens is that these group of investors appoint one bank, as their investment agent. So the agreement between the bank who is appointed as an investment agent and the participants is generally the investment agency agreement. And this bank represents all the investors and enters into Sharia compliant agreement with the corporate. Because this is an ijara syndication, so the contract is of lease, of ijara. So what happens is that, for example, the requirement of the corporate is to finance certain real estate. So in this particular transaction, the investors provide the funding requirement to the investment agent. The investment agent, for and behalf of the investors, purchases Sharia compliant asset from a seller, pays the required funding, and then leases that asset to the corporate. So just for the ease of understanding, for example, if the asset value was $100 million, so the investors provide $100 million to the investment agent, and they enter into an investment agency agreement where this bank is appointed as an investment agent to manage the liquidity or the funds provided by the investors. The investment agent purchases the real estate by paying $100 million to the seller, and then the investment agent leases that and enters into a lease contract with the corporate. So as we were discussing, the investment agent purchases the Sharia compliant asset, pays the liquidity which the investment agent has received from the financiers or the investors, and then enters into a lease contract with the corporate and leases the asset and the corporate pays the regular rentals to the investment agent. The investment agent receives those rentals and distributes to the investors, based on the amount of participation of each investor. And at the end of the lease term, generally what happens is that this asset is purchased by the corporate, through a sale and purchase agreement from the investment agent. So what we understand is that in a syndicate financing, there are two arrangements. One is the investment agent has with the group of investors, that is the investment agency agreement. The other is the investment agent, for and behalf of the investors, enters into Sharia compliant agreement with the corporate, and in this scenario the investment agent enters into a lease agreement with the corporate. It purchases the asset, leases the asset, receives the regular rentals, and distributes the regular rentals to all the investors. And then at the end of the lease term, the asset is sold to the corporate. Now, for acting as an investment agent, the bank who is acting as an investment agent receives certain investment agency fee there are two kinds of fee which are paid to the investment agent. The one fee the investment agent receives from the participants, which is called as an investment agency fee, generally which is very nominal. And from the corporate, it receives structuring fee or arrangement fee, which is generally a percentage of the financing amount. Now let us discuss about a murabaha syndication. You see, in a murabaha syndication, again, these are a group of investors. These group of investors appoint one individual bank as their investment agent. So there is an investment agency agreement which is entered into between the investors and the bank. And the funds which are pooled from the investors, the investment agent uses that fund to purchase a certain Sharia compliant asset. So if we take the same example, for example, if the funding requirement of the corporate was $100 million, so the financiers provide the $100 million to the bank, who is appointed as an investment agent to represent the investors. The investment agent purchases certain Sharia compliant asset, and the investment agent in this case sells the Sharia compliant assets to the corporate through a murabaha contract. And then the payment which is done by the corporate is on a deferred terms, and this payment is received by the investment agent bank, and then it distributes to all the investors based on their amount of participation. One important point which we need to keep in mind with reference to the murabaha syndication is that in murabaha syndication, because the contract which is created between the investment agent and the corporate is of a murabaha, which is in a way a debt contract, meaning to say there's a debt obligation from the corporate to pay to the investment agent. So for example, if one of the participants wants to transfer its obligation to receive the payment amount from the corporate to another participant and go out of the transaction, so it has to transfer its obligation on par, meaning to say that if this participant had invested $10 million and it wants to transfer that obligation to receive $10 million to a new participant, then it has to be on par, meaning to say it has to transfer the $10 million only. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that in a murabaha syndication, discounting is not allowed, because this is a debt which is to be received. Debt from Sharia perspective cannot be discounted. It has to be transferred on par. So if any participant moves out of the transaction, it has to transfer its receiving debt on par, and it cannot discount its debt. So this is one important point which one has to keep in mind in a murabaha syndication.